All right, y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing. And today we've got a very interesting combination that I'm looking forward to testing out because it could legitimately be pretty good or it could be hilariously bad as well. We've tested other slugs from this particular brand before, and some of them are decent. Some of them are horrible. So I don't know what we're going to see here today, but it could go either direction for sure. But as for the slug loads we've brought today, I got out some of these. The Sterling Big Game Series 410 slugs. They do say 36 gauge on here as well. 410 is actually about a 67 gauge if you want to convert it. From my understanding, 36 gauge is pretty much the old European size of the chamber of a 410 shotgun from when they were straight wall cases and stuff. So it doesn't compare to modern day standards anyway, if you wanted to call it a 67 gauge. But these are a 2.5 inch quarter ounce slug at about 1345 feet per second. Definitely quite a bit lower velocity than most other 410 slugs are. Will that help us out or hurt us any? I don't know, but we'll see what happens. And like I mentioned a second ago, we have tested a couple other Sterling brand name slugs in 12 gauge, both the Big Game Series and the Sterling Tornado slugs. The Big Game slugs, I believe, were actually somewhat usable. The Tornado slugs, on the other hand, were probably the worst slug load we've ever tested by a long shot. So I guess we'll see how these do. These are the Big Game Series, so that might bode well for us. We're just gonna have to see what happens. And here's what one of those shells looks like for anybody that was curious about it. Nothing fancy, but you can see that flat nose slug down in there. It's not a hollow point like a lot of rifled slugs are, and I think it's got some different grooves on the side. We'll pull one of these apart later on and take a better look at it, but that's what it looks like to start with for reference. As for the shotgun we're running them in, I brought out my Mossberg 500 410, 24-inch barrel with an improved cylinder choke screwed in. That's what a lot of rifled slugs recommend. Obviously, there isn't really any recommendation for those, so I'm just going to stick with what I typically use when it comes to slugs, that being the improved cylinder. And up on top, I've got a Simmons Pro Target red dot. Nothing fancy, but it serves its purpose just fine on a 410 setup like this. So I guess we'll see how this Mossberg does with these Sterling slugs, or probably more so the other way around. How well do the Sterlings do? Because we know this Mossberg has some decent slug potential. But as for our test today, we're going to run it the same as we kind of have been with these 410 slug tests recently. We're going to shoot two groups, one at 25 and another at 50 yards to get some accuracy. If at 25 yards we can't hit the broadside of a barn, then we may not even try 50, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I will be running all of our shots through a chronograph as well. Unfortunately, my camera battery died that was going to be filming the chronograph, but I will go over all of our numbers after the fact so you guys can see what we're getting. And then we'll head down to where I have a few water jugs lined up, and we'll shoot one into those as well. See what kind of energy and penetration capability we have, and if these slugs actually hold together or not. So we'll start off 25 yards with some accuracy testing, and we'll just see where we're at to start with. All right, so let's look through the chrono velocities real quick before we look at our target. Remember, the boss claim is 1345. However, we were definitely seeing more than their claim by quite a bit. It's not unusual that we see 100-ish feet per second above their claim from my particular shotgun, even though we have a 24-inch barrel. But this one kind of surprised me because a lot of these cheaper import loads aren't always loaded up to what they say they are. But we really didn't have that bad of numbers. So we had 1511, 1606, 1549, 1618, 1575, 1625, 1586, 1602, 1621, and 1634 for an average at 1592. So we are a good bit above their velocity, but really high 1500s isn't terrible for a 410 slug to actually perform pretty decently anyway. It's fast enough to still carry decent energy for what it is anyway, which isn't a ton of weight for that slug, but it's slow enough to not completely destroy itself shelf, probably anyway, when it actually impacts something. So that might bode well for us when we put them into some jugs here in a minute. But here are the energy numbers for a quarter-ounce slug at 1592, so you can see what we're pushing. Obviously not as much as something like a Winchester Super X at 1800 plus feet per second, but for what it is, it would still do the job, although it is a little weaker than a lot of the other standard off-the-shelf, more American-style 410 slugs. All right, so here we have our targets. They're not as terrible as what I thought they could potentially be. They're not anything great. They're not anything special, considering what they are anyway. And since we had a 25 round box, I decided to just go with 5 round groups instead of our normal 3. With a cheap slug like this that I have a decent amount of, I think it gives us a little better picture than just 3. I don't always do that, but in this scenario, I think it made sense. We'll start on the left with our 25-yard group. I thought we were actually going to get lucky when we had 2 that were pretty close. But then, as we continued to shoot, we definitely started to string them out a little bit. I was feeling the barrel heat between each of our shots, and the barrel never once felt warm to the touch even. So was it barrel heat? I don't know. I guess it potentially could have been, but I don't think it really made a difference much by looking out at the 50-yard grouping either. So at 25, we had 4.63 inches for group size. Now, in all reality, that's pretty terrible for 25 yards. However, for some 410 slugs we've tested, they couldn't even hold that good of a group. And I really did expect worse for what it is. Sterling has not always been the best, that's for sure. Now, moving over to 50 yards, we had 3 that were pretty decent down here at the bottom, and then 2 that strung up here up at the top as well. It's probably more so just luck of the draw more than anything else. I bet if we would have continued taking shots, we probably would have filled in a lot of this middle area here as well. It gave us 6.08 out at 50 yards, so maybe our 25-yard group could have been a little bit better. Maybe if we kept this guy up here down a little bit, but still 6 inches or so out to 50. It's not great, but it is not as bad as what I thought it could have potentially been before we started testing anyway. So these are far from the best we've seen by a long shot. But if you were hunting really close quarters or target shooting out on the range, they are at least good enough to hit what you're trying to aim at, I would say. I mean, everything is generally within your handprint size, at least out to 50 from what it seems. So I guess you could call it good enough, but overall, it is definitely far from anything great as far as groups go. That's for sure. But now, let's do some penetration testing here. I've got 6 water jugs set up down here, which should be plenty enough to catch these slugs. If they do the same thing that a lot of other rifled slugs do when it comes to 410 in particular, they're gonna just about come completely apart within 1 jug, and they might poke into jug number 2. Usually, that's kind of what we see, but they are a little different shape, a little different style, so maybe we might get lucky and they might hold together and penetrate a little better, especially with a little lower velocity than a lot of other rifled slugs are moving. So if we get into these black label jugs here, I'll be thoroughly surprised. If we get way into these big tubs at the back, I'll be even more surprised. But I'm willing to bet it's going to be these first 2 milk jugs right here. So as far as distance goes, based on our accuracy results, I think I'm going to go about 15 yards or so. It might not be as far of a distance as what I had hoped that we could push it out to and still accurately hit a milk jug, but at least it's not point blank range necessarily. So we'll see what happens. I will also have the chronograph so we can get our velocity and calculate energy for this particular shot. So let's take that shot and see if we get some surprising results here. Okay, so chronograph number on that one at about 5 yards in front of the muzzle and 10 yards away from our jugs is 1589. So we can calculate some energy based on that for this particular shot. So after doing some calculations for the energy from that particular shot, we had 611 foot-pounds. So by the time it actually got to the target downrange, we were probably 600 or maybe a little bit less. Just a pretty good reference point for this particular shot and how it actually performed in the jugs. And as far as our jugs go, I think it did about exactly what I thought it would. We have jug number 1 that's completely blown open and kind of just blowing in the breeze here. Absolutely nothing in there at all. But we had a perfectly dead center hit right here, exactly where I wanted it to be. And, well, we don't exactly see an exit, really. Maybe a tiny little flake right here, but that's really about it. And if we look at jug number 3 right there, obviously nothing. But jug number 2 as well, we have a big dent in the side of it just from the energy hitting everything, but nothing at all entered jug number 2. And sitting right here on the table, we have probably about half of the slug, maybe. It's just a tiny little thin piece of lead, and that is it. That's all we got, was 1 jug worth of penetration, and it completely just grenaded itself on impact. And that's pretty much exactly what I was fearing would happen. I hoped that with the little bit lower velocity compared to a lot of other rifled slugs in 410, we might hold together a little bit better, but that is not the case. That's a perfect example of why I wouldn't really suggest hunting with a lot of 410 rifled slugs. If you want to deer hunt with them, Brennecke is the way to go. So we'll take this into the bench here in a minute, measure it, weigh it, because that is pretty much just half of the slug. It's just a tiny little flake of metal more than anything else. Okay, so here's what we recovered right next to what one of these slugs looks like unfired. Now that we're in here on the bench, I cut one open so we can see the difference. Pretty interesting that there's just tiny little grooves on the side, but I definitely wouldn't even really call them rifling grooves or anything. Way different than a typical rifled slug looks, that's for sure, but it's got a big flat nose on it, and it still has the big hollow cavity in the back, and that's a big reason why these slugs did what they did and just turned into this. This is only a piece of it, and it's probably just half of the side skirt essentially of that. So unfired weight of these, it's supposed to be a 1/4 ounce, but we're at 99.6 grains. 1/4 ounce is 109 and some change, so we are already underweight for these, that's for sure. But compare that to what we recovered is only 18 grains. So not even close to our full weight, that's for sure. Big, massive difference there. Pretty terrible for weight retention for sure. And our farthest measurement for what we did recover is 0.598. So it did expand some, obviously, considering that's only part of our slug. And it's paper thin too. And the unfired slug is 0.403, so a little bit undersized. 410 is supposed to be 41 caliber, so 0.410. So a little bit undersized, but not entirely surprising compared to other 410 slugs we've seen and we've tested. So definitely a big difference there. And I was hoping they'd hold together a little bit better than that for sure. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that performance right there? Definitely some pretty interesting results. On one hand, if we just look at sheer performance capability, they're not overly accurate and they pretty much come apart on impact, it would seem. So performance-wise, not anything great there. Good enough for a plinking round at the range, but a hunting-oriented load, probably not going to be my choice, that's for sure. Now, as far as the accuracy goes, obviously in the grand scheme of things, it's not good, especially at 25 yards. If you can't pretty much touch them at 25, it's not great. But for what it is, a sterling slug load, we've seen tremendously worse from them in 12 gauge, that's for sure. So it could have been way worse, all things considered. And we have seen way worse results from just a Winchester Super X rifled slug. So really, I guess if you wanted to use these, 25 yards is probably the realistic limit. But for hunting purposes, I guess you could hunt foxes with them, maybe coyotes or something, groundhogs. But I wouldn't push it into the deer territory, that's for sure. Overall, I think it's probably pretty realistic. It's a pretty good average between what I thought we might see and kind of both ends of the spectrum here. So leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Sterling 410 slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Is this a combo you would ever hunt anything with? Or would you just use it as a cheap target load if you wanted to shoot 410 slugs out on the range? And maybe what other stuff do you want to see me do when it comes to these slugs or any other slug load through the 410? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.